silence that fell over the North Pacific in the spring of 1968 was not the peace of nature, but the terrifying quiet of a missing nuclear weapon. On a routine patrol in the freezing waters northwest of Hawaii, a Soviet ballistic missile submarine simply vanished from the face of the Earth. In the paranoid calculus of the Cold War, this silence was not just a tragedy, but the first breath of a potential apocalypse. For the 98 men aboard the Soviet submarine K-129, the mission had begun as a standard strategic patrol. They were operating a Golf II-class diesel-electric submarine, a workhorse of the Soviet Pacific Fleet tasked with carrying 3 nuclear ballistic missiles within striking distance of the American West Coast. The vessel was a steel tube filled with the sounds of machinery, the hum of electric motors, and the rhythmic routine of underwater life. But by early March, that routine had been severed. The submarine failed to transmit its scheduled check-in signal. In the regimented world of naval operations, a missed transmission is the loudest sound imaginable. It is an immediate signal that something has gone catastrophically wrong. There was no distress call, no emergency buoy released to the surface, and no frantic burst of coded data. There was only a void where a ship used to be. The reaction at the Soviet naval base in Kamchatka was immediate and frantic, though entirely hidden from the outside world. The Soviet Navy launched a massive search and rescue armada, deploying dozens of vessels, aircraft, and submarines to scour the Pacific. To a casual observer, it might have looked like a large-scale naval exercise, but the movement was too erratic, too desperate. Ships were crisscrossing the ocean in grid patterns, their sonar pounding the depths, searching for a hull that refused to answer. The families of the crew were told nothing. In the closed society of the Soviet Union, military disasters were state secrets, and the disappearance of a nuclear-armed vessel was a failure that the leadership could not admit. Wives waited for letters that would never arrive, and children waited for fathers who had already become part of the ocean floor. While the Soviets frantically searched the surface, a parallel crisis was unfolding thousands of miles away in the command centers of the United States Navy. The Americans were watching the Soviet search operation with growing alarm. They saw the Russian fleet surging into the Pacific, moving with an urgency that suggested a crisis. But the Americans had their own terrifying reason to be afraid. Around the same time that K-129 went silent, a United States submarine operating in the Pacific had also experienced a temporary communication dropout. For a few heart-stopping hours, the American command feared the unthinkable. They worried that the 2 submarines operating in the blind cat-and-mouse game of the Cold War had collided underwater. If an American submarine had accidentally rammed and sunk a Soviet missile boat, the diplomatic fallout would have been instantaneous and potentially nuclear. The collision of 2 nuclear-armed vessels in the tense political climate of 1968 could have been interpreted as an act of war. Protocols were activated, and emergency channels were monitored with white-knuckled intensity. The relief that flooded the American command centers when their own submarine finally checked in, safe and undamaged, was overwhelming. The United States had not sunk the K-129. But that relief was quickly replaced by a cold realization. If the Americans hadn't sunk it, and the Soviets clearly couldn't find it, then a rogue nuclear submarine was missing in the open ocean. This created the most dangerous kind of information vacuum. The United States could not ask the Soviet Union what was happening without revealing how closely they were watching. The Soviets could not admit to the Americans that they had lost control of a nuclear asset without appearing weak and incompetent. Both superpowers were locked in a stalemate of silence, staring at the same patch of ocean, neither side willing to speak the truth. The gray zone of the Pacific became a theater of unspoken tension, where a misunderstanding could escalate into a global catastrophe. The Soviets continued their desperate, flailing search, moving further and further away from the actual location of the wreck, blinded by the vastness of the sea. But the ocean itself keeps a record of everything that happens within its depths. While the Soviet surface ships were scanning the wrong coordinates, the United States Navy turned to a secret weapon that the Soviets did not know existed. It was a system known as SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System. This was a vast, classified network of hydrophones laid across the ocean floor, designed to track the movement of Soviet submarines by listening for the acoustic signature of their engines. It was a listening device on a planetary scale, sensitive enough to hear a whale sing or a propeller turn from hundreds of miles away. The American analysts went back to the tapes from early March looking for an anomaly. They found it. The hydrophones had recorded a specific, terrifying acoustic event. It was not the rumble of an earthquake, nor the sharp crack of a conventional explosion. It was the distinct, violent signature of a pressure hull imploding. The sound had traveled through the deep sound channel of the Pacific, picked up by sensors stationed hundreds of miles apart. By triangulating the data from multiple listening posts, American intelligence officers were able to pinpoint the location of the disaster with chilling accuracy. They knew exactly where the K-129 had died. They knew the latitude and longitude, precise to within a few miles. The data painted a grim picture of the submarine's final moments. The acoustic evidence suggested a catastrophic failure, a sudden and violent end that had sent the vessel plummeting to the bottom. The depth at the coordinates was staggering, over 16,000 feet. That is 3 miles of water, a distance deeper than the height of the Rocky Mountains. At that depth, the pressure is immense, enough to crush steel like paper and turn the human body into something unrecognizable. The Soviet search fleet was looking in the wrong place, hundreds of miles to the northwest, chasing phantoms and false echoes. The Americans watched them from a distance, knowing the truth but unable to share it. Eventually, the Soviet fleet gave up. After weeks of fruitless searching, the ships turned back toward Kamchatka. They assumed the K-129 was lost in the vast abyss of the Pacific, its location forever unknown, its crew entombed in a mystery that would never be solved. The Soviet Navy officially declared the submarine lost with all hands, though privately, the leadership was humiliated and fearful. They had lost a strategic asset carrying 3 megaton-class nuclear warheads and 2 nuclear torpedoes, and they had no idea where it was. They abandoned the search, believing the wreck was beyond the reach of human recovery. But in the quiet offices of U.S. Naval Intelligence and the Central Intelligence Agency, the conversation was shifting. The question was no longer, why did it sink? The question had become, what is down there? The realization slowly took hold that the United States possessed a piece of information that was arguably one of the most valuable secrets of the Cold War. They knew the location of a pristine Soviet nuclear submarine. This was not just a wreck, it was a treasure chest. K-129 was a Gulf II-class submarine, a vessel that represented the cutting edge of Soviet nuclear strategy. It carried the R-21 ballistic missile, a weapon the West had only seen in grainy spy photographs. Inside the hull, protected by the crushing darkness, were the cryptographic machines the Soviets used to encode their most secret communications. There were codebooks, operational manuals, and design schematics. There were the nuclear torpedoes themselves, weapons designed to destroy American carrier groups. The intelligence value of such a find was incalculable. If the United States could examine the wreck, they could learn the specific acoustic frequencies of Soviet warheads. They could understand the metallurgy of their pressure hulls. They could potentially break the Soviet naval codes, allowing them to read the enemy's mail for years to come. It would be the greatest intelligence coup in history, a window into the mind of the adversary that no spy could ever provide. But the obstacle was the ocean itself. 16,500 feet, 3 miles down. The wreck lay in the midnight zone, a place of eternal darkness, freezing temperatures, and crushing pressure. In 1968, the technology to reach such a depth did not exist. Humans had visited the bottom of the ocean in bathyscaphs, but no one had ever attempted to lift a 2,000-ton steel object from the seabed. The engineering challenges were considered impossible. It would require a ship larger than anything afloat, a lifting system stronger than any crane, and a level of precision that bordered on science fiction. Furthermore, the operation would have to be conducted in total secrecy. If the Soviets discovered that the Americans were looting their underwater grave, it would be an act of war. The site was in international waters, but the laws of the sea regarding sunken warships were murky and contested. Taking a sovereign nation's nuclear vessel was tantamount to piracy on a state level. The risks were astronomical. The cost would be in the hundreds of millions of dollars. The chance of success was statistically zero. Yet, as the American analysts looked at the coordinates on the map, the temptation was too great to ignore. The wreck was sitting there, alone in the dark, waiting. The Soviets had given up. The world had moved on. The silence of the K-129 was absolute. But for a small group of men in Washington, That silence sounded like an invitation. The transition from tragedy to opportunity had begun. The ocean had swallowed a secret, and the United States decided it was going to try and make the ocean give it back. The initial meetings were hushed and tentative. Engineers from the Navy and the CIA began to sketch out rough ideas. They looked at the depth charts. They calculated the weight of waterlogged steel. They argued about the structural integrity of a hull that had already imploded. Most experts agreed that it couldn't be done. The laws of physics and the limitations of materials science were formidable barriers. Cables would snap under their own weight. Ships could not hold a stationary position in the open Pacific with enough accuracy. The currents were too strong, the distance too great. But the Cold War was an era of impossible projects. It was the age of the moon landing, the SR-71 Blackbird, and the intercontinental ballistic missile. The impossible was simply an engineering problem that hadn't been solved yet. The audacity of the idea began to take root. If they could pull it off, they wouldn't just be stealing a submarine, they would be proving that the United States could reach anywhere, touch anything, and recover any secret, no matter how deep it was buried. The acoustic data from SOSUS was filed away in the highest classification levels. The coordinates were locked in safes that only a handful of people could open. The plan began to migrate from the hypothetical to the operational. They needed a cover story. They needed a ship. They needed money. And they needed a way to do it right under the nose of the Soviet Navy without triggering World War III. As the spring of 1968 turned into summer, the ocean surface remained empty and calm. The Soviet search fleet was gone. The K-129 lay broken on the silt, 3 miles down, its nuclear payload sleeping in the dark. The world assumed the story was over, but in the corridors of American power, the story of the K-129 was just beginning. The decision was forming, a slow and heavy momentum building toward one of the most expensive and daring covert actions in history. They were going to steal a submarine. As the 1960s draw to a close, the silence surrounding the wreck of K-129 deepens. The Soviet fleet has long since returned to its bases, their commanders resigned to the loss of their vessel. But in Washington, D.C., a small, classified group of intelligence officers and engineers is beginning to realize the true magnitude of what lies waiting in the dark. The ocean floor has presented the United States with a dilemma that balances the staggering cost of failure against the priceless reward of success. The prize sitting in the silt 3 miles down is not merely a steel hull, it is a technological Rosetta Stone. K-129 is a Golf II class ballistic missile submarine carrying 3 R-21 missiles in its sail. These weapons, known to NATO as the SSN-5 Serb, represent a terrifying leap in Soviet capability. They are the first Soviet missiles capable of being launched from a submerged submarine. Before the Serb, a Soviet boat had to surface to fire, exposing itself to radar and attack. With the Serb, they could strike American cities from beneath the waves without warning. American intelligence knows the missiles exist, but they have never touched one. They do not know the specific fuel chemistry. They do not know the guidance gyroscope tolerances. They do not know the fusing mechanisms. Recovering an intact R-21 warhead would allow American scientists to engineer countermeasures that could neutralize the Soviet nuclear threat for a generation. It would be like stealing the enemy's queen from the chessboard while he is still deciding his opening move. But the missiles are only half the treasure. Inside the command center of the sunken boat, secured in weighted safes, are the cryptographic codebooks and cipher machines of the Soviet Navy. In the world of intelligence, this is the Holy Grail. If the National Security Agency can recover these machines and the manuals that operate them, they can potentially decrypt years of intercepted Soviet naval communications. Every garbled radio burst, recorded by American listening posts since the mid-60s, could suddenly become readable English. The United States would know not just where the Soviet fleet was, but what they were thinking. The CIA designates the target with a clinical, detached name, the target object. But to the men tasked with retrieving it, the project quickly takes on the weight of an obsession. The sheer physical reality of the challenge is enough to break the spirit of any conventional engineer. The depth is the primary antagonist, 16,500 feet. To understand this distance, one must imagine stacking the Empire State Building on top of itself 13 times. The pressure at the bottom is over 7,000 pounds per square inch. It is a hostile, alien environment where steel behaves like plastic and darkness is absolute. The K-129 weighs roughly 2,000 tons, and it is waterlogged, filled with silt, and potentially structurally compromised. When the CIA first approaches the Navy with the idea of recovery, the response is skepticism bordering on ridicule. Naval engineers point out that the deepest successful salvage operation in history to that point had recovered a small aircraft from just a few thousand feet. Lifting a 2 million pound submarine from 3 miles down is physically impossible with current technology. Cables are the first problem. A steel cable long enough to reach the bottom would be so heavy that it would snap under its own weight before it even touched the submarine. The sheer drag of the water against miles of cable would make maneuvering impossible. The currents at different depths move in different directions, creating a chaotic hydrodynamic environment that would twist any standard lifting line into a knot. Furthermore, the operation requires a ship to hold a stationary position in the open ocean for weeks at a time. In 1969, GPS does not exist. Dynamic positioning, the ability of a ship to use thrusters to fight wind and current automatically, is in its infancy. To hover over a specific patch of mud 3 miles below while waves crash against the hull and winds buffet the superstructure requires a level of precision that has never been achieved. The Navy experts give the project a 10% chance of success. They argue it is a waste of money, a fantasy born in the minds of spies who do not understand physics. But the Central Intelligence Agency is not the Navy. The CIA turns to its Directorate of Science and Technology, a division that specializes in the impossible. These are the men who built the U-2 spy plane and the SR-71 Blackbird. They do not see the depth as a barrier, they see it as a design constraint. The project is greenlit under the code name Project Azorian. The budget is initially estimated in the tens of millions, but everyone involved knows it will climb into the hundreds of millions. It will eventually rival the cost of an Apollo moon mission. The secrecy requirements are absolute. The project is compartmentalized, meaning that even the people working on it will only know their specific piece of the puzzle. A welder might know he is building a giant claw, but he will not know what it is designed to grab. The engineers discard the idea of cables. Instead, they propose a radical solution: a pipe string. They will build a massive ship with a derrick in the center, like an oil drilling rig. Instead of a flexible cable, they will lower sections of high-strength steel pipe, screwed together one by one, to form a rigid connection to the ocean floor. At the bottom of this 3-mile straw, they will attach a massive mechanical claw, a capture vehicle designed to wrap around the hull of the submarine and lift it gently from the mud. It is a brilliant concept, but it creates a massive operational problem. You cannot build a ship like this in secret. It will be enormous, over 600 feet long, with a derrick tower reaching 20 stories into the sky. It will be visible from space. Soviet spy satellites track every major ship construction project in the United States. If the Russians see a strange vessel being built with a giant internal moon pool and heavy lifting gear, they will ask questions. If they suspect the US is going after their submarine, they will simply park a destroyer over the site and wait. The CIA needs a cover story. It has to be a lie so big, so audacious, and so public that no one will doubt it. It has to explain why a massive, custom-built ship is sailing to the middle of the Pacific to lower equipment to the bottom of the ocean. The answer comes from the burgeoning industry of deep-sea mining. Scientists in the late 1960s are fascinated by manganese nodules, potato-sized rocks scattered across the ocean floor that contain valuable metals like nickel, copper, and cobalt. There is a gold rush mentality developing around the idea of mining these nodules. The CIA decides to hide their submarine recovery ship in plain sight by disguising it as a mining vessel. But they need a front man. They need someone who is wealthy enough to fund such a venture, eccentric enough to attempt something so risky, and secretive enough to avoid press scrutiny. They need a man whose involvement stops people from asking logical questions. They need Howard Hughes. By 1969, Howard Hughes is a recluse. The billionaire aviator and industrialist has retreated from the public eye, living in the penthouse of the Desert Inn in Las Vegas. He is known for his erratic behavior, his obsession with germs, and his impulsive business decisions. He buys hotels, airlines, and television stations on a whim. If Howard Hughes decides to build a massive ship to mine rocks from the bottom of the ocean, the world will not see it as a CIA operation. They will see it as just another crazy project by the world's richest madman. The CIA approaches the Hughes Tool Company, specifically the Summa Corporation, Hughes Holding Company. The negotiations are handled at the highest levels. Hughes himself reportedly never meets directly with the CIA agents. The deal is brokered through his trusted lieutenants. But the answer is yes. Hughes is a patriot, and perhaps the sheer scale of the deception appeals to his dramatic sensibilities. He agrees to lend his name and his company to the operation. The cover story is masterfully constructed. The Summa Corporation announces a bold new venture into deep ocean mining. They release press kits touting the potential of manganese nodules to solve the world's resource shortages. They hire legitimate geologists and mining engineers to give the project a veneer of scientific credibility. These civilians are essentially human shields for the secret. They are doing real research on a ship built for a fake purpose. With the cover in place, the contracts are signed. The global marine development firm is hired to design the ship. They are leaders in offshore drilling, and they understand the physics of the pipe string. The Lockheed Corporation is hired to build the capture vehicle, the giant claw that will grasp the submarine. The scale of the deception is breathtaking. The U.S. government is effectively laundering hundreds of millions of taxpayer dollars through a billionaire's private company to build a ship that officially does not exist on any naval register. The workers building the hull at the Sun Shipbuilding and Drydock Company in Chester, Pennsylvania, believe they are working for Hughes. The press reports on Hughes's latest folly, speculating on how much money he will lose mining the ocean floor. Meanwhile, the engineers face the reality of the design. The capture vehicle, codenamed Clementine, is a mechanical beast. It looks like a massive barn roof with giant hydraulic fingers. It weighs over 4 million pounds by itself, and it has to be lowered on a pipe string that swings like a pendulum in the ocean currents. It has to be positioned within inches of a target that the operators cannot see 3 miles below their feet. They also have to solve the problem of concealment during the lift. If they just pull the submarine up to the surface, Soviet satellites will photograph it hanging from the bottom of the ship. The solution is the moon pool. The ship is designed with a massive internal hangar open to the sea at the bottom. The capture vehicle will pull the submarine up into the belly of the ship, where massive steel doors will slide shut beneath it. The submarine will be drained and examined inside the ship, completely hidden from the outside world. As 1970 ends, the blueprints are finalized. The steel is ordered. The money is flowing. Project Azorian has moved from a wild idea in a conference room to a physical reality in a shipyard. The audacity of the plan is settling in. They are not just building a ship, they are building a machine to rob the grave of a superpower. The intelligence community holds its breath. They have bet their budget, their reputation, and potentially global peace on the idea that they can reach deeper than anyone has ever reached before. And they are betting that Howard Hughes is crazy enough to make the Russians believe the lie. The stage is set for the construction of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. It will be a vessel unlike anything the world has ever seen. A ship designed to do the impossible, owned by a ghost, and sailing toward a destiny that is still 3 miles down in the dark. In the gritty industrial landscape of Chester, Pennsylvania, along the banks of the Delaware River, a leviathan begins to rise from the dry dock of the Sun Shipbuilding and Drydock Company. It is November 1971, and the workers welding the massive steel plates believe they are constructing the future of commercial mining. They are building the Hughes Glomar Explorer, the flagship of billionaire Howard Hughes' eccentric dream to harvest riches from the ocean floor. To the casual observer, the ship is an oddity. It is 618 feet long with a beam of 115 feet, making it immense even by the standards of heavy industry. But it is the silhouette that draws the eye. Dominated by a massive, towering derrick amidships and a strange, blocky superstructure, it looks less like a ship and more like a floating oil refinery. However, the true nature of the Glomar Explorer is hidden inside the hull. While the press marvels at the mining equipment on deck, the CIA engineers are focused on the empty space in the ship's belly. This is the moon pool. It is a cavernous internal hangar, 199 feet long and 74 feet wide. essentially a swimming pool the size of a cathedral carved out of the center of the vessel. At the bottom of this hangar, massive sliding doors open directly to the ocean below. The moon pool is the heart of the deception. It is designed to solve the critical problem of Soviet surveillance. If the Americans were to simply winch a Soviet submarine up to the surface, it would be dangling from the crane for the entire world to see. Soviet spy trawlers and satellites would capture the image instantly. The moon pool changes the geometry of the theft. The plan calls for the submarine to be lifted from the bottom, pulled up through the water column, and raised directly into the hollow belly of the ship. Once inside, the bottom doors will slide shut, the water will be pumped out, and the Soviet vessel will be sitting high and dry inside a secret laboratory, completely invisible from the outside. But building a floating garage is only the first challenge. The second is stability. The ship has to lower a pipe string 3 miles down. At that length, the steel pipe acts like a fragile strand of spaghetti. If the ship moves too much on the surface, if it drifts with the current or rolls with the waves, the pipe will snap. A snapped pipe string carrying a 4 million pound load would recoil with enough energy to slice the ship in half, killing everyone on board. To prevent this, the engineers install a revolutionary gimbal system for the derrick. The entire drilling rig is mounted on massive bearings that allow it to tilt independently of the ship. The Glomar Explorer can pitch and roll in the Atlantic swells, but the derrick remains perfectly vertical, isolating the pipe string from the violence of the ocean. Beneath the waterline, the ship is fitted with a sophisticated dynamic positioning system. In an era before GPS, this is science fiction. The ship uses a network of acoustic transponders dropped on the ocean floor to triangulate its exact position. A computer, one of the most powerful seagoing computers of the 1970s, reads this data and automatically fires a series of thrusters and propellers to keep the ship locked in place. It battles the wind and the current in real time, maintaining its station within a radius of 40 feet. While the ship takes shape in Pennsylvania, a different team is working in total secrecy across the country in Redwood City, California. Inside a nondescript hangar owned by the Lockheed Corporation, engineers are building the capture vehicle. Its official name is the mining machine, but the crew calls it Clementine. Clementine is a monster. It is a massive steel framework equipped with large hydraulic claws, often referred to as breakout legs. The device is designed to be lowered to the ocean floor, straddle the sunken submarine, and then close its fingers around the hull. It weighs over 4 million pounds. It is covered in cameras, lights, and sonar sensors to guide the operator sitting 3 miles above. The engineering tolerances are agonizingly tight. K-129 is not a solid piece of metal, it is a damaged, fragile wreck. If Clementine squeezes too hard, she will crush the hull and spill the nuclear secrets back into the mud. If she squeezes too lightly, the submarine will slip out during the ascent. The hydraulic systems have to be powerful enough to lift a battleship, but delicate enough to cradle an egg. To hide Clementine from Soviet spy satellites, the CIA builds yet another massive structure, the HMB-1, or Hughes mining barge. This is a submersible barge, essentially a giant floating roof. Clementine is assembled inside the HMB-1, completely covered. To the outside world, the barge is just a storage unit for mining equipment. In reality, it is a Trojan horse designed to transport the claw to the ship without anyone seeing what it actually looks like. As 1972 bleeds into 1973, the operation enters its most critical phase, the mating of the claw and the ship. The Glomar Explorer sails from Pennsylvania. Around Cape Horn, she is too wide for the Panama Canal, and arrives in the calm waters off Santa Catalina Island, California. The HMB-1 barge is towed out to meet her. The transfer is a feat of engineering ballet. The barge, carrying the secret claw inside, is submerged until it sits on the seabed. The Glomar Explorer maneuvers over the submerged barge. The ship opens its moonpool doors and lowers 2 massive docking legs. These legs latch onto the claw hidden inside the barge and lift it up into the ship's belly. The barge is then floated away, empty. It is a magic trick performed with thousands of tons of steel. A satellite looking down would see a mining ship and a storage barge conducting a transfer. They would never see the giant claw moving from one to the other. Clementine is now locked inside the moon pool, ready for war. Throughout this entire process, the cover story is pumped into the media with relentless energy. The Summa Corporation issues press releases detailing the potential of manganese nodules. Howard Hughes's public relations machine paints a picture of a visionary industrialist solving the world's metal shortage. The media eats it up. The story fits perfectly with the public perception of Hughes. He is the man who built the Spruce Goose, the largest wooden airplane in history. Of course he would build a giant ship to vacuum rocks off the ocean floor. The sheer absurdity of the project makes it credible. Why would the CIA build something so conspicuous? Why would intelligence agencies get involved in deep-sea mining? It is too loud, too public, too weird to be a spy operation. The brilliance of the cover is that it explains the technology. Why does the ship need a massive derrick? To lift heavy mining equipment. Why does it need a moon pool? To bring the manganese crusher on board for maintenance. Why does it need dynamic positioning? To stay over the mining deposits. Every piece of classified technology has a plausible civilian explanation. Behind the scenes, the crew is assembled. It is a strange mix of roughneck drillers, merchant mariners, and intelligence operatives. The Glomar Marine personnel operate the ship. The CIA mission specialists operate the recovery systems. They live and work side by side, but the lines of information are strictly drawn. Many of the ship's crew believe the mining story. They think they are on a commercial venture. Only a select few, the cleared personnel, know that the manganese nodules are a lie and that the real target is radioactive. The tension on board is palpable. The ship is packed with cutting-edge technology that has never been tested in the open ocean. The pipe string lifting system relies on 60-foot sections of high-strength steel pipe screwed together with automated machines. The heave compensator, a massive hydraulic system, is designed to neutralize the vertical motion of the waves so the load on the pipe remains constant. If any of these systems fail, the pipe snaps, the claw falls, and the project ends. By the summer of 1973, the Hughes Glomar Explorer is ready. She sits in the harbor at Long Beach, a gray behemoth bristling with antennas and cranes. The cost has ballooned to over $350 million, equivalent to nearly $2 billion today. It is one of the most expensive single ships ever built. To the Soviets, she is a curiosity. Their naval attachés monitor the press reports. They analyze the photos. They conclude that the Americans are indeed crazy, wasting fortunes on seafloor rocks. They do not suspect that the ship is a weapon. They do not suspect that the target coordinates programmed into the ship's computer are the grave of their own missing submarine. In June 1974, the Glomar Explorer slips her moorings. She turns her bow toward the Northwest Pacific. The cover story has held. The engineering is complete. The crew is trained, but as the coast of California fades behind them, the reality of the mission settles in. They are sailing to a spot in the middle of nowhere, 3 miles above a tragedy. They are going to attempt the deepest heavy-lift salvage in the history of mankind. And they are going to do it while the Soviet Navy watches, protected only by a lie about eccentric billionaires and potato-sized rocks. The mechanical monster is loose. The billion-dollar gamble is about to face the ocean. And in the dark water beneath the hull, the K-129 is waiting to be disturbed. As the summer of 1974 unfolds, the Hughes Glomar Explorer arrives at a set of coordinates that exist on no commercial shipping map. The location is a desolate patch of the North Pacific, roughly 1,500 miles northwest of Hawaii. There is nothing here but gray swells and the endless horizon. To the crew standing on the deck, it looks like the middle of nowhere. But to the intelligence officers monitoring the instruments in the shielded control room, this is the center of the world. 3 miles beneath the keel, the wreck of the Soviet submarine K-129 is waiting. The date is July 4th, Independence Day. While the rest of the United States celebrates with fireworks and parades, the men on the Glomar Explorer are beginning a process that is as delicate as surgery and as heavy as industrial construction. They are about to build a steel straw reaching from the surface of the ocean to the bottom of the abyss. The operation begins with the opening of the moon pool doors. Massive hydraulic rams push the steel gates aside, exposing the water inside the ship's belly to the open ocean below. The capture vehicle, the massive claw named Clementine, is unhooked from its docking bays. It hangs suspended over the black square of water, a 4-million-pound spider made of steel and sensors. The lowering process is agonizingly slow. It is not a matter of simply unspooling a cable. The Glomar Explorer uses a pipe string system similar to an oil drilling rig but scaled up to unprecedented dimensions. The crew, a mix of roughnecks and CIA specialists, works in 12-hour shifts on the derrick floor. The rhythm is mechanical and relentless. A 60-foot section of high-strength steel pipe is lifted from the pipe rack. It is swung into the center of the derrick. The automatic make and break machines spin the pipe, screwing the threads into the section below it with massive torque. Then, the heavy lift system lowers the entire string 60 feet into the water. The clamps engage, holding the weight. The next pipe is brought in. Repeat. Section by section, hour by hour, Clementine descends 60 feet, 120 feet, 1,000 feet. As the string gets longer, the physics become terrifying. The pipe is made of the strongest steel available, but at this length, it behaves like a wet noodle. It stretches under its own weight. It sways with the underwater currents. The ship on the surface is rocking in the waves, and if that motion is transferred to the rigid pipe, the steel will snap. To prevent this, the ship relies on the heave compensator. This is a massive hydraulic system that acts as a shock absorber for the entire pipe string. As the ship rides up a wave, the compensator pistons extend to keep the pipe steady. As the ship drops into a trough, the pistons retract. It creates a surreal visual effect on the derrick floor. The ship moves, the horizon moves, but the pipe remains perfectly still, an immobile steel column disappearing into the floor. While the roughnecks wrestle with the steel, the ship's dynamic positioning system fights the ocean. The thrusters fire constantly, churning the water around the hull. The computer makes thousands of adjustments every minute, keeping the Glomar Explorer locked within a 40-foot circle. If the ship drifts outside this circle, the pipe will bend beyond its structural limit and shear off, sending the capture vehicle and millions of dollars of equipment plummeting to the bottom. But the ocean is not the only threat. 2 weeks into the operation, a blip appears on the ship's radar. It is a vessel moving fast, closing the distance. The bridge crew identifies it through binoculars. It is a Soviet naval tug, the SB-10. Panic ripples through the command center. The cover story is about to be tested. The CIA mission directors order all classified materials to be covered or moved below decks. The civilian mining crew is told to act naturally. The ship's radio operators are instructed to broadcast routine chatter about mining operations and weather reports. The SB-10 slows down and begins to circle the Glomar Explorer. The Soviet captain is curious. He sees a massive, strange-looking American ship sitting motionless in the middle of the ocean. He sees the derrick tower. He sees the pipe going down. For the Americans, the tension is suffocating. If the Soviet captain suspects the truth that the ship he is looking at is currently lowering a claw onto a sunken Soviet submarine, he could ram the pipe string. He could drag a cable across it and snap it. He could radio for reinforcements. The Soviet tug moves closer, closing to within a few hundred yards. Soviet sailors line the rail, taking photographs with telephoto lenses. They wave. The American crew, suppressing the urge to vomit from nerves, waves back. They play the part of bored commercial miners. They lounge on the deck. They point at the derrick. They project an air of mundane industrial routine. The SB-10 lingers for nearly 2 weeks. It watches, it listens, it circles. The game of chicken is played out in slow motion. The Glomar Explorer cannot stop its operation without raising suspicion, but it cannot proceed too obviously either. The pipe keeps going down, foot by foot, right under the eyes of the enemy. Finally, the SB-10 departs, apparently satisfied that the Americans are just crazy capitalists wasting money on rocks. But the relief is short-lived. Days later, a second blip appears. This one is larger. It is the Chazma, a Soviet missile range instrumentation ship. This is a serious military vessel, packed with advanced sensors and listening gear. It carries a helicopter. The Chazma is aggressive. It steams aggressively toward the Glomar Explorer, signaling a demand for identification. The American captain responds, sticking to the script. "We are conducting deep ocean mining tests." The Chazma launches its helicopter. The Soviet chopper buzzes the Glomar Explorer, flying low over the derrick. The downdraft whips the clothes of the men working on the rig. The pilot is close enough that the Americans can see his face. He is taking pictures of the moon pool, the pipe string, the thrusters. Inside the CIA control room, the mission directors are sweating. The Chashma has the capability to jam their communications. It has the capability to disrupt their acoustic positioning beacons on the seafloor if the Chashma decides to drop a depth charge or even a heavy sonar buoy near the pipe. The acoustic shockwave could confuse the ship's computer, causing a drive-off where the ship loses position and snaps the string. The Americans pile crates on the helipad to prevent the Soviet pilot from attempting a landing. They maintain radio discipline, they continue the charade. Down below, 3 miles deep, Clementine is getting close. The sensors on the capture vehicle begin to pick up the bottom. The sonar paints a picture of the seascape. It is a barren, muddy plain, interrupted by a long, dark scar. K-129. The wreck is there. It is lying on its starboard side, half buried in the silt. The hull is broken, but large sections are intact. The sail, housing the nuclear missiles, is visible. The bow, containing the torpedoes and the crypto room, is there. The operators in the control room stare at the monitors. They are the first human beings to see the submarine since it vanished 6 years earlier. The ghostly images confirm everything the acoustic data had promised. The prize is real. But the arrival of the Chashma threatens to ruin everything at the last second. The Soviet ship moves into a blocking position, blaring warnings over the loudspeaker. They suspect something, but they don't know what. The sheer size of the Glomar Explorer and the absurdity of the mining story act as a shield. The Soviet logic cannot make the leap. Why would the Americans build a $300 million ship just to steal a wreck? It doesn't make sense. Therefore, it must be mining. Eventually, the Chashma also turns away. The Soviet commander, perhaps concluding that the Americans are simply encroaching on an area of interest or conducting commercial espionage, decides not to initiate an international incident. He sails over the horizon. The Glomar Explorer is alone again. The pipe string is now fully extended. 16,500 feet of steel pipe hangs from the derrick. The weight is immense, over 14 million pounds of pipe and capture vehicle. The derrick groans under the load. The gimbal bearings screech as they adjust to the swell. Clementine hovers just a few feet above the mud. The operators use the thrusters on the capture vehicle to fine-tune its position. They are flying a 60-ton spaceship by remote control with a 3-mile delay in physical reaction. They align the massive steel fingers with the hull of the K-129. The target is the forward section of the submarine. This is the piece that matters. It contains the nuclear torpedoes, the command center, the code books, and the missiles. The process is agonizingly precise. They have to lower the claw over the submarine without bumping it. If they hit the hull too hard, they could trigger a collapse, or worse, detonate a conventional explosive inside the wreck. The silt on the bottom is easily disturbed. One wrong move and a cloud of mud will blind the cameras for hours. Lowering final 10 feet, the operator calls out. On the black and white screens, the massive steel fingers of Clementine slide over the curved hull of the Soviet submarine. It fits. The engineering calculations were perfect. Engage capture. The hydraulic rams activate. The giant claws begin to close. They dig into the mud beneath the submarine, scooping underneath the hull. The steel fingers wrap around the K-129 like a hand grabbing a soda can. The sensors confirm contact. The grip is solid. The weight on the indicators jumps as the claws take the load of the submarine. For a moment, there is silence in the control room. They have done it. They have physically connected with a Soviet nuclear submarine 3 miles below the surface. The audacious gamble, the years of secrecy, the billion-dollar ship, it has all worked. But the hard part is not catching the fish. The hard part is reeling it in. The lift begins. The make and break machines reverse their direction. The pipe string is pulled up 60 feet at a time. A section is unscrewed, removed, and placed in the rack. The string gets shorter. The load gets heavier as the submarine lifts out of the buoyant mud. The strain on the pipe is near its breaking point. The steel is crying out, vibrating with the tension of lifting millions of pounds of waterlogged metal. The engineers watch the stress gauges with terror. Every wave that hits the ship spikes the load. Up it comes, 1,000 feet, 2,000 feet, 3,000 feet. The K-129 is leaving the grave where it has rested for 6 years. It is rising through the midnight zone, swaying gently at the end of the long steel tether. The Americans have stolen a nuclear submarine. Now they just have to keep it from falling apart before they get it into the boat. Under the relentless glare of the sodium deck lights, the Hughes Glomar Explorer is no longer a ship. It is a machine fighting a singular battle against gravity. The connection has been made. The capture vehicle, Clementine, has wrapped its steel fingers around the carcass of the Soviet submarine K-129. The sensors in the control room confirm that the prize is secure. The weight indicators on the heavy lift derrick jump, registering the millions of pounds of waterlogged steel now hanging from the pipe string. The process of bringing the submarine to the surface is not a smooth, continuous hoist. It is a grueling mechanical stutter. The pipe string, that 3-mile-long straw of high-strength steel, must be dismantled exactly the way it was built, only in reverse. The heavy lift cylinders raise the entire string 60 feet. The roughnecks on the derrick floor, CIA operatives and specialized drillers, lock the string in place with massive wedges called slips. The upper section of pipe is unscrewed by the automated machinery, lifted away and racked. Then the cylinders lower, grab the next section, and pull again. It is a slow, rhythmic agony. Lift, lock, break, rack, repeat. Each 60-foot cycle takes minutes, and there are hundreds of sections to remove. The ascent is agonizingly slow, moving at the pace of a crawling insect. For the mission directors in the shielded control room, time seems to warp. They exist on coffee, cigarettes, and adrenaline. Every hour the submarine hangs in the water column is another hour of exposure. The pipe string is under maximum tension, stretched tight like a piano wire. If a rogue wave hits the ship, if the dynamic positioning computer glitches for a second, if a hydraulic seal blows, the string could snap. For the first few days of the lift, the operation proceeds with terrifying perfection. The submarine rises from the abyss. It leaves the crushing pressure of the seafloor, passing through the midnight zone. 1 mile up, 2 miles up. The cameras on the capture vehicle send back grainy, black-and-white images of the K-129's sail and hull, still cradled firmly in Clementine's grip. The Soviet ballistic missiles, the nuclear torpedoes, and the code machines are inching closer to the belly of the ship. But physics is a cruel adversary. The K-129 is not a pristine vessel. It is a wreck that imploded violently when it sank 6 years earlier. Its structural integrity is compromised. The steel hull is cracked, fatigued, and held together by little more than the friction of its own ruin. As the submarine rises, it is subjected to new stresses. The drag of the water pushing against it creates turbulence. The temperature changes. The pressure decreases, causing trapped air pockets to expand. The capture vehicle was designed to grapple a solid object. The engineers at Lockheed and the CIA had calculated the lifting points based on the blueprints of a Gulf II class submarine. But they could not calculate the unknown variables of the damage. They are trying to lift a broken egg with a pair of pliers. At a depth of approximately 9,000 feet, roughly halfway to the surface, disaster strikes. It does not happen with an explosion. There is no fireball, no siren. It happens with a sudden, sickening lurch that vibrates through the entire ship. In the control room, the mission specialists watching the monitors see the nightmare unfold in real time. On the screens, the K-129 suddenly shifts. The massive steel claws of Clementine are holding firm, their hydraulic pressure maxed out. They do not fail. The failure is in the submarine itself. The hull of the Soviet boat, weakened by the implosion and the stress of the lift, fractures. The structural steel shears. In a horrifying instant, the majority of the submarine, a section nearly 100 feet long, snaps off from the portion held by the claws. The rear two-thirds of the K-129, containing the missile sail, the control room, and the bulk of the intelligence treasure, begins to fall. The camera captures the silent, slow-motion departure. One moment, the submarine is there, a dark mass filling the screen. The next, it is sliding away, tumbling back into the darkness. It falls end over end, a 2,000-ton tomb plummeting back to the ocean floor from where it was stolen. As it falls, it likely breaks apart further, spilling debris into the water column, scattering its secrets back into the abyss. On the bridge of the Glomar Explorer, the ship shudders as the weight on the derrick suddenly drops. The heavy lift compensators jolt, reacting to the loss of millions of pounds of load. The pipe string whips like a relaxed bowstring. In the control room, the silence is absolute. The monitors show only the empty water below the capture vehicle and a small, jagged remnant of the submarine still clutched in the forward claws. The men stare at the screens, their minds struggling to process the magnitude of the loss. They have lost the missiles. They have lost the crypto room. They have lost the reason they spent $350 million and 6 years of their lives. The despair is immediate and crushing. Some of the engineers weep openly. Others stare blankly at the data, looking for a glitch, praying that it is a sensor error. But the cameras do not lie. The claws are holding only the bow section of the K-129, a piece of wreckage roughly 38 feet long. The rest is gone. The mission director faces a critical decision. The primary objective has failed. The logical course of action might be to drop the remaining piece and go home. Why risk the ship and the cover story for a scrap of metal? But intelligence is a game of salvage. Even a fragment of a Soviet submarine is valuable. The bow section contains the torpedo tubes. It might contain nuclear torpedoes. It might contain sonar equipment. It almost certainly contains the bodies of Soviet sailors who were in the forward compartments when the boat went down. Continue the lift, the order comes down. The crew returns to the derrick floor, their morale shattered but their discipline intact. The rhythm resumes, lift, brake, rack. But the atmosphere has changed. The excitement is gone, replaced by a grim determination to finish the job. They pull the pipe string up for another mile. The remaining section of the K-129 is fragile. It is a mangled piece of steel hanging by a thread. There is a terrifying possibility that the nuclear torpedoes inside the bow could be unstable. As the pressure decreases, the warheads are entering a new environment. If a torpedo warhead detonates, even a conventional explosion, it will destroy the capture vehicle and potentially blow the bottom out of the Glomar Explorer. The ship is also facing a radiological threat. The submarine has been underwater for years, but the nuclear weapons are still radioactive. As the wreck gets closer to the surface, the radiation sensors on Clementine begin to tick. The water flushing through the moon pool will soon be contaminated. Finally, the capture vehicle reaches the bottom of the ship. The moon pool doors are opened. The massive claws, holding their reduced prize, are pulled up into the belly of the Glomar Explorer. The huge steel gates slide shut beneath them, sealing the ocean out. The powerful pumps engage, draining the millions of gallons of seawater from the moon pool. The water level drops, revealing the capture vehicle dripping with slime and mud. And there, locked in its grip, is the mangled bow of the K-129. It is a terrifying sight. The steel is twisted and torn, evidence of the violent forces that destroyed the submarine. It is covered in deep-sea sediment, smelling of the ancient ocean floor. Radiation monitoring teams, dressed in protective suits and carrying Geiger counters, are the first to enter the damp, echoing cavern of the moon pool. They sweep the wreckage. The radiation levels are manageable. The torpedoes, if they are there, have not exploded. The CIA specialists move in. They climb over the capture vehicle, inspecting the prize. It is not the intelligence bonanza they had dreamed of. The missile books are gone. The cipher machines are gone. They have retrieved a fraction of the target. But as they cut their way into the crushed compartments of the bow, they find that the ocean has preserved more than just steel. Inside the twisted wreckage, encased in the sediment that filled the hull, are the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. The discovery shifts the mood of the operation once again. This is no longer just a salvage mission or a spy caper. It is a recovery of the dead. These men died in 1968, alone in the dark, serving their country. Now, through a feat of engineering madness, they have been brought to the surface by their enemies. The failure of the lift hangs heavy over the ship. The billion-dollar gamble has not paid out the jackpot, but they have done the impossible. They have reached down 3 miles and touched the bottom of the world. They have proven that the ocean is no longer a sanctuary. As the Glomar Explorer begins to stow its gear and prepare for the long voyage home, the crew grapples with a complex mix of pride and heartbreak. They have built the greatest machine in maritime history. They have pulled off the deepest heist ever attempted, and yet they are leaving the best part of the secret behind, sitting in the mud, waiting for a return trip that might never happen. The break in the hull broke the mission, but it did not break the silence. The Soviet Union still does not know what has happened. The world still thinks Howard Hughes is mining for manganese. The secret is safe, even if the submarine is not. The belly of the Hughes Glomar Explorer smells of iodine, ozone, and ancient mud. It is August 1974, and the moon pool, the massive internal hangar that was designed to hide a submarine from the world, has become a tomb. The giant steel doors at the bottom of the hull are sealed shut, holding back the Pacific Ocean. The water has been pumped out, leaving the cavernous space damp and echoing. In the center, gripped by the hydraulic talons of the capture vehicle, sits the twisted wreckage of the K-129's bow. It is a scene of industrial devastation. The 38-foot section of the Soviet submarine is a mangled mass of high-strength steel, ripped apart by the violence of the implosion 6 years earlier and further damaged by the trauma of the lift. It is covered in the gray silt of the abyssal plain, a thick, clay-like mud that clings to every bolt and flange. But as the CIA recovery teams move in, dressed in protective suits and carrying Geiger counters to monitor for radiation, the mission shifts from intelligence gathering to a far more somber duty. They are looking for codes. They are looking for torpedoes. But what they find first is humanity. Embedded in the wreckage, encased in the sediment that has filled the crushed compartments, are the remains of 6 Soviet sailors. These men died in March 1968, unaware that their final resting place would become the target of the most expensive grave robbery in history. They have been brought up from the crushing darkness of 3 miles down into the artificial glare of American floodlights. The discovery brings a hush to the operation. The CIA operatives and the roughnecks on the crew are professionals, hardened by the Cold War and the grueling nature of their work. But the presence of the dead changes the atmosphere in the moon pool. The enemy is no longer a strategic abstraction or a target on a sonar screen. The enemy is flesh and bone. The intelligence haul itself is disappointing. The nuclear missiles fell back into the abyss with the rest of the submarine. The cryptographic machines, the holy grail of the mission, were likely in the center section that broke away. The Americans have recovered 2 nuclear torpedoes, which is a significant technical prize, and some documents that provide insight into Soviet naval operations. But compared to the billion-dollar investment and the staggering risk, the return is meager. They grabbed the tiger by the tail, but the tiger got away. However, the treatment of the Soviet sailors becomes a defining moment of the operation, a flash of dignity in a silent war usually defined by ruthlessness. The CIA mission directors make a decision. There will be no intelligence exploitation of the remains. There will be no disrespect. These men were sailors, and they will be treated as such. On September 4th, 1974, a ceremony takes place on the deck of the Hughes Glomar Explorer. It is one of the most surreal moments of the Cold War. A group of American intelligence officers and sailors stand in formation, dressed in their uniforms. In front of them rest 6 metal caskets. The ship is stationed in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, thousands of miles from land, hidden behind a cover story of mining for manganese nodules. Yet, on the deck, the Cold War is momentarily suspended. The service is conducted with full military honors. An American chaplain reads a prayer. The service is read in both English and Russian. To honor the fallen Soviet crewmen, the Americans play a recording of the Soviet national anthem. The stirring orchestral music drifts out over the empty ocean, played by the very people who built a machine to steal the submarine. It is a gesture of profound professional respect. The submariners on the Glomar Explorer understand that the ocean is the common enemy, and those who die fighting it deserve peace. The ceremony is filmed. The CIA records the event, documenting the prayers, the anthem, and the commitment of the bodies to the deep. The caskets are slid out from the moon pool, returning the men to the ocean that claimed them 6 years earlier. This film is classified top secret. It is locked away in a vault in Langley, Virginia, a piece of evidence that the United States government hopes will one day prove to the Soviet Union that, despite the theft, honor was maintained. With the dead buried and the wreckage picked clean of whatever secrets it held, the Glomar Explorer turns for home. The mood is mixed. They have achieved an engineering miracle, but the intelligence failure stings. The CIA immediately begins planning a second mission, codenamed Project Matador. They want to go back. They want to fix the claws, return to the site, and pick up the rest of the submarine that is still waiting in the mud. They believe the cover story is still intact. They believe Howard Hughes' eccentric reputation is still shielding them. But while the ship was at sea fighting the laws of physics, a different kind of disaster was unfolding back on land. The secrecy of Project Azorian was about to be shattered not by a Soviet spy, but by a common burglar. On June 5, 1974, just weeks before the Glomar Explorer began the lift, a group of thieves broke into the headquarters of the Summa Corporation in Los Angeles. This was Howard Hughes's holding company, the nerve center of his empire. The burglars were not international super spies. They were looking for cash. They assumed that a billionaire like Hughes would keep stacks of money in his safe. They found the safe on Romaine Street. They cracked it open. But instead of millions of dollars in cash, they found stacks of documents. Among the papers were internal memos describing a contract between the CIA and Howard Hughes for the construction of a specialized ship to lift a Soviet submarine. The burglars, realizing they had stumbled onto something far more valuable than gold, decided to hold the documents for ransom. They contacted the CIA and demanded money in exchange for the return of the classified files. It was a nightmare scenario. The CIA was being blackmailed by petty criminals while their ship was in the middle of a delicate operation in the Pacific. The agency refused to pay, fearing it would set a precedent. Instead, they enlisted the FBI to track down the thieves. But the damage was done. The circle of people who knew the secret was widening. The documents began to circulate in the shadowy underworld of Los Angeles. As the Glomar Explorer docks in Long Beach in the autumn of 1974, the dam is beginning to crack. The manganese mining cover story has held for years, but whispers are starting to reach the press. Investigative journalists, sensing a story that doesn't add up, begin to dig. They look at the cost of the ship. They look at the strange behavior of the Summa Corporation. They look at the rumors of a Soviet submarine. The legendary investigative reporter Seymour Hersh of the New York Times gets the lead. He pieces together the narrative. He knows about the ship. He knows about the CIA connection. He knows about the submarine. The CIA goes into crisis mode. The director of Central Intelligence, William Colby, takes the extraordinary step of personally contacting news editors. He pleads with them not to publish. He argues that the operation is ongoing. He tells them that Project Matador is being prepared and that if the story breaks now, the United States will lose the chance to recover the nuclear missiles and the codes. He invokes national security. He appeals to their patriotism. For a few months, the press holds back. The major papers agree to sit on the story, acknowledging the gravity of the request. The secret survives the winter of 1974 by the skin of its teeth. But a secret known by thousands of shipbuilders, hundreds of sailors, a gang of burglars, and a room full of journalists cannot be kept forever. In February 1975, the Los Angeles Times publishes a story. It is not the full, detailed account, but it is enough. Then the columnist Jack Anderson, who has no patience for government secrecy, goes on national television. He tells the world everything. He reveals that the manganese mining was a lie. He reveals that Howard Hughes was a front for the CIA. He reveals that the United States government spent hundreds of millions of dollars to steal a sunken Soviet submarine from the bottom of the Pacific. The cover story evaporates overnight. The Project Matador follow-up mission is immediately canceled. There is no way the Glomar Explorer can go back now. The Soviet Union is alerted. Within days, Soviet ships are swarming the site of the wreck, guarding the remains of K-129. The reaction in Moscow is a mix of fury and grudging admiration. They are outraged that the Americans would dare to desecrate a war grave. But they are also stunned by the technological prowess required to do it. The idea that the Americans could lift a submarine from 3 miles down is a shock to the Soviet Naval Command, who had deemed the feat impossible. In Washington, the fallout is chaotic. The Ford administration is forced to deal with a diplomatic crisis. The cost of the project, exposed as over $300 million, adjusted for inflation, over $1.7 billion, becomes a massive political scandal. Critics call it a waste of taxpayer money, a Cold War folly that produced little intelligence value. The Hughes Glomar Explorer, once the most secret ship in the world, becomes a tourist attraction. It sits in the harbor at Long Beach, a giant rusting monument to a blown cover. The manganese nodule industry, which had been hyped up by the CIA's fake data, collapses when investors realize the entire sector was a spy novel fabrication. But amidst the political noise and the media frenzy, the image that remains most poignant is locked away in that vault in Langley. It is the grainy footage of American sailors standing at attention on a rolling deck, the sound of the Soviet anthem playing over the wind, and the sliding of 6 metal caskets into the gray water. The operation failed to get the missiles, it failed to get the codes, it failed to keep the secret. But in the final analysis, it succeeded in proving something terrifying and profound. It proved that in the Cold War, there was no place on Earth, not even the bottom of the deepest ocean, that was safe from the reach of the superpowers. The ocean had tried to keep the dead, but the machine had come for them anyway. Now the government has to figure out what to say. The world is asking questions. The Soviets are demanding answers, and the CIA, caught red-handed in the biggest heist of the century, has to invent a new language of denial. In the spring of 1975, the United States government finds itself in a semantic trap. The secret of Project Azorian has been blown wide open. The Los Angeles Times, the New York Times, and national television have broadcast the story of the submarine heist to the world. The cover story of manganese mining has evaporated. The Soviet Union is furious, its naval attachés demanding explanations for what they view as a grave robbery and an act of piracy. But officially, the United States has said nothing. This silence is not just stubbornness, it is a legal and diplomatic necessity. If the president admits to the operation, he is admitting to violating international maritime norms and effectively stealing a Soviet nuclear asset. Such an admission could force the Soviet Union to retaliate militarily to save face. However, if the government issues a denial, they will be caught in a lie, as the press has irrefutable evidence, including blueprints and witness testimony. Into this breach steps a journalist named Harriet Ann Philippi. She files a Freedom of Information Act (FOIA) request, demanding that the CIA release all documents related to the Hughes Glomar Explorer. The CIA is cornered. Under the law, they must respond. They cannot release the documents because they are classified top secret, but they cannot say the documents don't exist because that would be perjury. And if they simply refuse without grounds, they will lose in court. The solution comes from the mind of Walt Logan, the CIA's general counsel. He drafts a legal response that is a masterpiece of ambiguity, a linguistic shield that will define government secrecy for the next half-century. The response states, the agency can neither confirm nor deny the existence of the requested documents. This is the birth of the Glomar Response. It is a phrase designed to be a black hole. It acknowledges the question but refuses to validate the premise. By refusing to confirm the existence of the records, the CIA protects the secret. By refusing to deny them, they avoid lying. It is a perfect, frustrating circle of logic. The courts uphold it. The precedent is set. From this moment on, every time a government agency wants to hide a covert operation, a drone strike, or a UFO investigation, they will invoke the name of the ship that tried to steal a submarine. The Glomar Explorer's most lasting legacy is not the steel it recovered, but the phrase it gave to the English language. While the lawyers battle in court, the ship itself becomes a white elephant. The Hughes Glomar Explorer cost over $300 million to build. It was designed for a single mission that it failed to fully complete. Now, stripped of its cover story, it is a ship without a purpose. The CIA tries to transfer it to the Navy, but the operating costs are astronomical. It is mothballed, sitting in the ghost fleet of Suisun Bay, California, for decades. Its massive derrick and moon pool, once the pinnacle of engineering, gather rust and seagull droppings. Ironically, the cover story eventually becomes the reality. In the late 1990s, the ship is pulled out of storage, refitted, and sold to a commercial drilling company. For another 15 years, the Glomar Explorer drills for oil in the deep ocean, doing exactly the kind of heavy industrial work Howard Hughes claimed it was built for. It is finally scrapped in China in 2015. The vessel that once held a Soviet nuclear submarine in its belly is cut apart for razor blades, its metal recycled into the global supply chain. But 3 miles down in the North Pacific, the story is far from over. The wreckage of the K-129 remains exactly where it fell. The bow section was recovered, but the center and stern sections, roughly 2/3 of the submarine, are still resting in the abyssal silt. Inside those crushed compartments lie the R-21 nuclear ballistic missiles. The warheads, containing plutonium and uranium, are slowly corroding in the high-pressure saltwater environment. They are ticking environmental time bombs. As the metal casings degrade, the nuclear material will eventually leak into the ocean. It is a silent, toxic legacy of the Cold War, a radioactive scar on the seabed that will persist for thousands of years. Also remaining in the dark are the bodies of the 92 Soviet sailors who were not in the bow section. They were never recovered. They lie in the missile compartments and the engineering spaces, entombed in the machine they served. For their families in Russia, the lack of recovery meant decades of uncertainty. The Soviet government, in its paranoia, had originally told the families that the men were missing during training, denying them the full honors and benefits of combat deaths. The silence between the nations regarding the human cost of the operation lasts until the Cold War finally thaws. In October 1992, 3 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, CIA Director Robert Gates travels to Moscow. He is the first American intelligence chief to visit the capital of the former enemy in a spirit of cooperation. He carries a briefcase containing a single VHS tape. In a meeting with Russian President Boris Yeltsin, Gates hands over the tape. It is the classified film of the burial ceremony held on the deck of the Glomar Explorer in 1974. "We have kept this for you," Gates says. For the Russian leadership and later for the families of the crew, the footage is a revelation. They watch the American sailors standing in dress blues. They hear the prayers. They hear their own national anthem playing over the Pacific wind. They see the respect accorded to their sons and husbands. The gesture creates a bridge across the ideological divide. It transforms the narrative of Project Azorian from a story of theft to a story of shared maritime sacrifice. The theft of the submarine was an act of aggression. The burial of the crew was an act of humanity. It provided closure to families who had waited 24 years to know that their loved ones were treated with dignity. Today, the site of the K-129 wreck is considered a war grave. It is monitored but rarely visited. The technology to reach it is now commonplace. What required a billion-dollar CIA effort in 1974 can now be done by commercial ROVs. But the site is left alone, a monument to the era when the world held its breath. Project Azorian stands as the ultimate symbol of Cold War audacity. It was a moment when the United States decided that the laws of physics were negotiable if the intelligence value was high enough. It demonstrated a level of ambition that is hard to comprehend in the modern era. To build a ship longer than 2 football fields, invent entirely new technologies, and construct a fake mining industry just to pick up a broken submarine is a feat of engineering madness that borders on the sublime. The operation failed to get the missiles. It failed to get the code books. By the strict definition of its mission objectives, it was a failure. But in the wider context of history, it was a staggering display of capability. It forced the Soviet Union to realize that their secrets were not safe even in the deepest trenches of the ocean. It forced them to spend billions updating their own security and surveillance, draining their economy further. And it proved that humanity had conquered the depth. Before Azorian, the deep ocean floor was as inaccessible as the surface of Mars. After Azorian, the door was open. The dynamic positioning systems, the heavy lift pipe strings, and the underwater robotics developed for the Heist became the foundation of the modern offshore oil and gas industry. The technology built to steal a weapon ended up powering the world. As we look back at the Hughes Glomar Explorer and the men who sailed her, we are left with a story that feels like fiction. It has billionaires, spies, nuclear missiles, and a giant claw. But it is real. It happened. The ocean has swallowed the ship. The scrapyards have taken the steel. The politicians who authorized the mission are gone. But the K-129 is still down there, rusting in the dark. It is a reminder that some secrets are too heavy to lift, and some stories are best left buried beneath 3 miles of water. The Cold War was fought in the skies, in the jungles, and in the cities. But its strangest battle was fought in the silence of the deep Pacific, where a giant ship tried to catch a falling star and for a brief moment actually held it in its hand. The saga of Project Azorian is more than just a spy story. It is a testament to the terrifying scale of human ambition. In the 1970s, 2 superpowers were locked in a struggle so intense that they turned the entire planet into a chessboard. They were willing to spend the equivalent of the space program to reach into the abyss, driven by the fear that the other side might have an advantage. There is a strange purity to the engineering of Azorian. The men who built Clementine and the Glomar Explorer were solving problems that had never been solved before. They were pioneers, working at the bleeding edge of material science and hydrodynamics. They didn't do it for fame. They couldn't tell anyone what they were doing. They did it because the challenge was there and because their country asked them to do the impossible. But the story also carries a somber warning about the cost of secrecy. The Glomar Response created a legal mechanism that allows governments to hide the truth from their citizens to this day. It institutionalized ambiguity. The operation that was meant to uncover Soviet secrets ended up creating a new way for America to keep its own. Ultimately, the ocean remains the final arbiter. We can build our ships and our claws. We can lower our lights into the trench. But the ocean is vast, crushing, and indifferent. It allowed the Glomar Explorer to take a piece of the prize, but it kept the heart of the submarine for itself. The K-129 rests in the dark, a silent memorial to 98 men and a time when the world lived on the edge of the knife. It reminds us that while we may conquer the land and the sky, the deep sea keeps what it wants. If this deep dive into the hidden history of the Cold War captured your imagination, we'd be honored to have you with us again. Until next time, stay curious and take good care.